North Carolina voters agreed in 2018 to place a voter photo identification requirement in the state constitution. State lawmakers approved legislation within weeks to make that happen, but state and federal lawsuits have blocked implementation of voter ID ever since. Joining us to discuss a new development in voter ID is Dr. Andy Jackson. He is director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the John Locke Foundation. And Andy, we've been waiting since 2018 to see some action on voter ID. Now there's a lawsuit in court that's dealing with this very issue.
Yeah, it's been going on and on and on and on, and it looks like it's going to be going on for at least a while yet. We have several court cases. We have at least two in state court. We have one in federal court as well. There have been injunctions that prevented voter ID from being implemented in the last election. One of those injunctions was overturned at the federal level this year. The state injunction was upheld, and so now we are finally here at the trial phase of the state lawsuit on this one. And so we've got a 3-judge panel looking at it, and no matter what happens, we're going to be looking at appeals no matter what the result is, so we're just going to be going for a while.
There have been legal challenges against having a constitutional amendment itself, and then against the law to implement the constitutional amendment. This suit, the one before the 3-judge panel, is about the implementation law, correct?
Correct. This is presuming that the constitutional amendment is constitutional. So it doesn't go to that question. There's a separate lawsuit about that. But yeah, it is not against the constitutional amendment, because it's important to know that the Constitution can't contradict the Constitution. The Constitution can't be unconstitutional. So it is actually on the implementation law, which means that yes, you may be required to have a photo ID, but according to the lawsuit, you can't have this particular implementation of that ID requirement, and that's what the basic argument is on this.
People who haven't been following this very closely are probably saying to themselves, hey, we voted to put voter ID in the state constitution. There's widespread support for voter ID. Who objects? Why don't we have one? What are the plaintiffs saying about why this is something that North Carolina should not have moving forward?
Well, the basic idea is that it goes against the idea that elections are free in North Carolina, that it free not as in free, no payment, free as in, free to do what you want, that this creates an insurmountable barrier to people, disproportionately racial minorities, people with disabilities, that it will be really too onerous on them to exercise their right to vote if this is implemented. And of course, the law provides for free IDs, so money is not an issue here. The law also allows people to vote without an ID if they have a reasonable explanation about an impediment, like if they do have a handicap that prevents them from getting down to the Board of Elections, for example. They're still allowed to sign an affidavit, vote a provisional ballot, and that ballot is automatically counted unless there's evidence to the contrary that comes up later. So there's those multiple kind of provisions that make this really milquetoast might be too strong a word, but a really mild voter ID law, certainly compared to some of the voter ID laws that we have in other states.
In fact, there was a voter ID provision that North Carolina approved, the courts threw out. Then after the constitutional amendment, the lawmakers came back and dealt with this new voter ID implementation, and as you said, put in all kinds of ways that people could avoid actually getting an ID and still cast a ballot. From your perspective, does it look as if anyone who is eligible to vote could be able to vote and not have to pay some fee to do so?
Yeah, I mean, once again, the bill provides or requires county boards to provide free IDs for people who need them and can't get them in some other way. And you don't have to. There is this argument that that getting the materials you need to get the ID is onerous, but you only need to be able to provide the last 4 digits of your social security number or a driver's license number. Obviously, if you don't have a driver's license, that doesn't qualify. But the last 4 of your social, which people generally know. You need that if you want to get Social Security benefits or even get into the system. And so you don't even need to have your Social Security card, for example, for that to get, for you to get that free ID. There's a whole bunch of different, and there's a wide range of acceptable IDs, including student IDs, tribal IDs, employee IDs, military IDs, in addition to your driver's license and your Board of Elections issued free ID.
You mentioned earlier that regardless of what happens in this court case, this issue is going to go on and on. Whoever loses is going to appeal, and we'll probably have more court hearings. Remind us, North Carolinians have quite a bit of support for voter ID. It's passed in the Constitution, and polls continually show pretty strong support.
Yeah, I've seen the poll numbers are generally in the low to mid 60s support. The vote for it was a little bit less, but it was still 55%, which is a solid win for anything in this kind of highly polarized environment that we have these days. So it does have broad support, and I'm expecting that broad support, if it was something that was being pushed and a whole bunch of people were objecting to it, maybe the courts, because the courts don't operate in a vacuum as much as we would like them to. I think the judges are aware that this is something that the people had voted on, that the people had essentially demanded this. So I think that does put a little more oomph behind this ID law that we didn't have for the 2013 ID law.
As this case moves forward and others dealing with voter ID, we know one person who's going to be watching very closely is Dr. Andy Jackson. He is director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the John Locke Foundation. Thanks so much.
Thank you.